DMV Download, the new daily podcast from WTOP News, is out now. Hosts Megan Clorty and Luke Garrett get the story behind the story.
Every weekday afternoon, Megan and I will go beyond the headlines with WTOP reporters and sources to bring you more on the biggest local stories impacting you, our fellow Washingtonians.
The DMV Download podcast is available now on all major podcast platforms. Subscribe today so you don't miss an episode. The DMV Download podcast is presented by Steamfitters Local 602.
Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. Grammy-winning composer Christopher Tin presents a free concert tomorrow night at the Anthem in Washington, D.C. He joined me to discuss the world premiere of To Shiver the Sky, an 11-movement piece about the history of aviation, as well as his bonus performance of Baba Yetu, which made him the first composer ever to win a Grammy for scoring a video game in Civilization 4. Hey, thanks so much for joining us on WTOP.
Thanks for having me.
We're talking because you're bringing To Shiver the Sky. It'll be a free performance at the Anthem. Thanks for doing this. So tell me about To Shiver the Sky. It's going to be along with the U.S. Air Force Band and stuff's going to be there with you too?
Yeah, this is the world premiere concert of To Shiver the Sky. It was an album that was released in 2020, but unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we had to postpone the world premiere concert. It's finally back on. It's finally happening. The orchestra is actually the U.S. Air Force Band with their string section as well. And the vocal parts are sung by the Singing Sergeants, as well as the Choral Arts Society of Washington, D.C., with special guest stars, modern, medieval.
Awesome. And tell me, I mean, there's so much I want to talk to you about because by the way, our listeners, I believe you're the first composer of a video game to win for a Grammy for the video game, right? I mean, that's a claim to fame no one can take from you.
I suppose so. I mean, that was for a song called Baba Yetu from the video game Civilization 4. And we're actually performing that song as well on Sunday night.
Oh, great. So we'll be playing that as well. Cool. Well, take me into the instrumentation of that too, by the way, while we're at it. You know, what sort of musicality do we hear in that Civilization 4 song?
Baba Yetu is actually a Swahili setting of the Lord's Prayer for chorus and orchestra, as well as a couple of soloists. So it's a rousing, robust, inspirational setting of the prayer, and it's very rhythmic. It's got kind of an African flavor to it, and it should be a lot of fun.
And maybe if there's, you know, I'm sure we have a lot of video game fans, but if there's not some non-video game fans, tell them what Civilization 4 is about. You know, like what kind of game is it?
Civilization 4 is a turn-based strategy game where you basically found a civilization from the earliest days as settlers and hunters and gatherers until you reach the modern age where your civilization hopefully blossoms into a full-fledged modern civilization. And you achieve one of the possible many endings of the game, which includes putting a man on the moon.
That sounds really cool. So it's not like an Age of Empires where you go to war with other civilizations.
Well, you can absolutely wage war with your neighbors in Civilization. I mean, there's many possible resolutions, some peaceful and many more that are non-peaceful. But it is a game where you do shepherd your civilization from its very earliest days of inception to modern day, and that includes things like conquest and war.
That's so cool. Do you I want to get back to the concert in a second, but real quick, while it's video game sparking me, do you have an all-time favorite game? I mean, for me, it's The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, celebrating its 30th anniversary on the Super Nintendo. But what do you have a favorite one that maybe you didn't score, that you maybe grew up playing?
I certainly played all of the early Nintendo titles, when the console first came out. Civilization is honestly the game that I probably logged the most hours playing, though, and that's by nature of the game. It is incredibly addicting. Once you get into that world, you find yourself staying up all night just playing the game obsessively. It's a very, very good game and very addicting.
Awesome. And when did you win the Grammy for that?
That was actually in 2011. And it's interesting because I won in 2011, but the game actually came out in 2005, but it wasn't eligible for the Grammys that year. And it wasn't eligible until I re-recorded the song onto an album of my own works. And that's what finally made the song eligible in the 2011 awards year.
Gotcha. And you won a second Grammy too, right? After that, what was the second one for?
It was actually the same year that I won
Okay.
the second one. And that was actually for the album that I re-recorded Baba Yetu onto. And that album is called Calling All Dawns. And it won for Best Classical Crossover Album.
Gotcha. Well, thanks for that detour that I'm sure a lot of our gamers will love, and that they'll want to turn out to this concert for your connection to that stuff. But back to Shiver the Sky now. So I mean, similarly, Civilization 4 is about, the rise of civilization. This one, To Shiver the Sky, similarly charts, mankind's journey into the heavens, if you will. We got, and you're dealing a lot with flight in this one, right? Like all the different great men and women over history that have taken to the skies. Explain what you mean by that.
To Shiver the Sky is an 11 movement piece about the history of aviation. And what I've done is I've taken the words of 11 of aviation's great pioneers and visionaries and scientists and astronomers, and I've set them to music. And so we have words from people like Leonardo da Vinci, Yuri Gagarin, Amelia Earhart, Jules Verne, Copernicus, and many other seminal figures in the history of aviation. And it weaves the entire story of mankind's desire to conquer the stars from our earliest days of just looking up at the sky and imagining ourselves up there, up until the climactic finale, which is actually a setting of John F. Kennedy's "We Choose to Go to the Moon" speech. So across 11 movements, we tell much of the course of aviation history.
Stay tuned for the rest of my conversation with Christopher Tin, but first, a message from a fellow WTOP podcast.
DMV Download, the new daily podcast from WTOP News, is out now. Hosts Megan Clorty and Luke Garrett get the story behind the story.
Every weekday afternoon, Megan and I will go beyond the headlines with WTOP reporters and sources to bring you more on the biggest local stories impacting you, our fellow Washingtonians.
The DMV Download podcast is available now on all major podcast platforms. Subscribe today so you don't miss an episode. The DMV Download podcast is presented by Steamfitters Local 602.
Welcome back to Beyond the Fame for the rest of my conversation with Christopher Tin.
So there's 11 total. You pick a different one for each of the 11 movements?
That's it, exactly, yeah. And a lot of times I set them in the original languages spoken by those figures. So the Leonardo da Vinci movement is sung in Italian. The Copernicus movement is sung in Polish, and so forth.
I assume, are there going to be, like subtitles or surtitles on a screen showing, the lyrics when it's in a different language so the audience can read along, or how does that work?
I believe the lyrics will actually be accessible via program notes that you can download to your phone during or before the concert. But we're trying to keep the multimedia portion of the concert fixated on all of this beautiful imagery that we've actually created for the concert to sort of highlight the mood and the feeling of the music as it's being performed.
So describe the imagery a little more. Is it all on a big screen behind you, like images of air flight, etc.?
That's the general idea, but it goes a little further than that. There is a big projection screen behind you that will show the performers as the concert is going on, but sort of interwoven into that footage is footage sort of from the era of that particular movement, or sort of accentuating what that movement is about. For example, during the Jules Verne movement, there's a lot of footage from early cinema, particularly the French filmmaker Georges Méliès.
Trip to the Moon.
Yeah, exactly. A Trip to the Moon. So we take some footage from that era, which sort of conveys sort of this excitement of turn of the century Paris, right? And we project that onto the back as we're performing the movement that sort of takes place around this birth of industry around the early 19th century, I should say. Early 20th century, late 19th century.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, you're speaking my language. I mean, that image of what is it, like a rocket ship in the Man in the Moon's eye or something? I'm trying to remember.
That's it exactly, and you may just see that in the concert on Sunday.
You may just see it. Well, you mentioned there's singing in a bunch of different languages, but who's doing the singing? Dote on I guess it's the Choral Arts of Society of Washington.
The Choral Arts Society of Washington sings the large choral parts, but a large part of the singing is actually taken up by the singing sergeants, which is the Air Force Band's in-house chamber group. And then there's a trio of soloists called Modern Medieval, who will be performing some of the movements as well, and they show up on the original recording. And a couple of the Air Force Band, a couple of the singing sergeants will be taking very prominent solo roles in the concert as well.
Awesome. And just talk about the idea of presenting this free, how it's a great service to everyone in DC to see this great thing. But what's the idea behind, we're going to offer this free for everybody?
Well, that's one of the perks of working with the U.S. Air Force Band. I mean, I think part of their mandate is all of their events that they put on have to be free for the tax-paying American public. And so that's one of the wonders of working with these exceptional musicians.
Awesome. And even though it is free, I think you do have to make a reservation. So everyone knows, you have to head over to WashingtonPerformingArts.org to make your reservation. So make sure you do that. Before you head down to the anthem. All right. And then, so in terms of, if our listeners turn out to see this, it's, how long does it run? Like, I think it's straight through with no intermission, right?
Yeah, To Shiver the Sky itself is roughly an hour long, but we're also performing a couple other things, including Baba Yetu, my theme from Civilization 4. So I imagine the concert will take about an hour and a half, maybe a little less.
Gotcha. And before we run, just remind our listeners a little bit about your own story, your creative spark in music and the arts. Where'd you grow up and how'd you get into, all things creativity?
Well, I'm originally from Northern California, and I think I caught the composing bug sometime in high school. I went to school first at Stanford University, where I actually double majored in music and English, but then eventually I went to London to study at the Royal College of Music to do my graduate degree there. I've been living in Los Angeles for about 20 years now, and my career is kind of a balance between scoring films, video games, writing concert music, releasing my own albums, and all these other sort of miscellaneous things that composers like myself can get into, like performing concerts. I have a great love of history. I have a great love of culture. And many of my solo releases are centered around this idea of humanity and the goodness inherent in humanity. I try to shine a light on the positive aspects because there's so many negative things that one can focus on these days. It's nice to be reminded that once in a while, in the course of human history, we've done pretty amazing things, including putting a man on the moon.
So well said. That's the perfect place to leave it. Again, everyone, it is Christopher Tin's To Shiver the Sky. It'll be a free performance on Sunday, May 15th, 7 p.m. at the Anthem. So get your tickets now. Hey, thanks for joining us. This was great.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Jason.
Thanks so much for joining us on Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Remember to hit the subscribe button and give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time. I wanted to take a second to tell you about an app I really enjoy. Living in the DC area is great, and Podcast DC gathers all of the local shows that I like all in one local app. Health, sports, local news, politics, and so much more. Podcast DC is the new local app with hundreds of DC area podcasts to choose from. I can earn exciting rewards just for listening and share the podcasts I love instantly. Available in the App Store or in Google Play, listen local with Podcast DC.